Hey, good morning, everybody. Special Friday edition of AL.com Bammers from your friends at the Mercedes-Benz Tech program. It was it was Ben. It was probably one of the most peaceful Thanksgivings that Bama fans have been able to enjoy for quite some time. Um, Given that, I mean, look, hopefully everybody had a nice one last year. It was for once sort of detached, I think, from the normal football anxiety last year. But, it has been a long time, I think, since Alabama has entered an Iron Bowl as heavily favored as they are heading into this one. And that does not necessarily, we know, mean that people are not anxious about it. And that's part of what we want to talk about today. We're here to hear from you, the fans, which is the main point of what we do here on Bammers, to hear how you guys are feeling one day out from this game. I want to know if you're anxious about it. I want to know what your anxiety level is. Are you excited to see it? Do you feel like you can't wait to get out there uh, and give some back to Auburn after losing the last two in Jordan Hare, or are you a person who is a little more gun shy about it than that? So, Ben, I will say this. I think that compared to where things were about a month ago, Alabama fans are probably breathing a little bit easier this week than maybe they were about this game, let's say 4 or 5 weeks ago when Auburn was looking pretty hot.
Maybe that's probably true. Less stressed and anxious about it, definitely. But it's still the Iron Bowl, and the Iron Bowl is almost no fun for Alabama until the clock hits zero. Right? I know that there are a lot of Alabama fans who feel this way, but there's a great follow out there on Twitter, Ascot Friday. If you don't follow him, he's a really fun Alabama fan to follow, and his philosophy on this is that there are no winners when it comes to the Iron Bowl, at least from Alabama's perspective. It's all agony. You're either agonizing from kickoff until the final buzzer if Alabama wins throughout the game about losing to Auburn with all the tricks that they pull, how they can spoil Alabama's national championship hopes. You're agonizing and stressing through that. And the other agony is if you just lose to Auburn. So it's just no fun either way. You just want it over with, right? And so I think a lot of Alabama fans probably feel that way. But at the same time, there's no greater feeling than Alabama beating Auburn in an Iron Bowl. And we've seen Alabama come out on top in some one-sided affairs, especially last year, 2018, obviously behind Tua. I can go to 11-12, and there have been some amazing games where Alabama has been relatively stress-free. But everybody knows what can happen in these games. And I think a little ounce of Alabama fans are kind of expecting the same on Saturday, despite how much Alabama might be favored by.
For sure. And, I've seen a lot of confidence already in the comments, but I'm also seeing comments like this from Joey Green saying, you just don't know what to expect from this Alabama team. And I think that's been kind of a running theme for the whole season. It's, I think when you look at their record, when you look at their stats, this is an Alabama team that on paper is very good, one of the best teams in college football. The playoff committee obviously feels that way. They've got them at number 3 right now. But we've also seen we've seen them lose on the road to Texas A&M. We've seen them struggle to put away teams that are really not we know are not as talented as Alabama, like LSU and Arkansas the last couple of weeks. So it's really tough to have the same expectation of dominance. And we'll get into expectations a little bit later. It was something that Nick Saban talked about this week. But I think in general, Ben, that's probably the thing giving people a lot of pause about this game is this. Unlike, say, last year's team, this is not a team that, no matter how good they are in terms of the outcome and the results, they have not been giving Alabama fans a lot of boring fourth quarters where they can kick their feet up and not pay attention to what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's look, I mean, in terms of what to expect from the Alabama team, I expect them to win most of their games. And being at 10-1 going into this game, and now a 20 point favorite, basically, I expect them to win this game. I don't know what will happen against Georgia. I don't know what would happen if and when Alabama got into the playoff, but they should probably be undefeated going into this game. I mean, they had the Texas A&M game. They came back from a large deficit, took a 7-point lead, and had a chance to win it late in the game. They could have, but they didn't. They lost the game. And sometimes Alabama teams, no matter how dominant they are, they lose games. 2012 was one of the most dominant college football teams I've ever seen in my life. They lost a game to Texas A&M at home. It happened. 2011, same thing. One of the most dominant defenses you will ever see in college football. They lost. So it happens. These great teams can lose games. Look at all those great Patriots teams in the NFL. If you want to talk NFL, they lost multiple games per season. Obviously, NFL allows you to do that the way that it's structured, but great teams can lose. They do lose. The Warriors in the NBA, they lost some games that year. They won 73 games. They seem invincible at times, and Alabama has seemed invincible. But I guess the expectation that I still sort of have is they're probably going to win, and they're probably going to win Saturday. But we all know what can happen. As the commenter just said, the Iron Bowl is a really big deal to Auburn. It's a really big deal to those teams, and we've seen how much it means to the fan base and how much it means to beat Alabama. And Alabama fans love to say championships matter more than the Iron Bowl, and that's probably true. That should be true for anybody, including Auburn. But it all goes out the window when these two teams play each other on Saturdays, and I hope Alabama is able to rise to the occasion because Auburn is going to show up to win the game.
As Easy Money here says, the going out the window thing I think applies even more when this game is played at Auburn. And I know there's plenty of Alabama fans that don't want to hear that think Auburn is overrated or Jordan-Hare Stadium is overrated, but the facts kind of speak for themselves. Alabama's record in Auburn is not particularly good, and particularly over the Nick Saban era. That they have lost to Auburn at Auburn a number of times. That, I mean, if you compare it to the rest of Alabama's SEC opponents during Saban's time at Alabama, it's not even close. The amount of wins that Auburn has managed to pull off against Alabama with Nick Saban as the head coach. They seem to be the only program that's kind of invincible to whatever magic Saban has put on this program. And look, Alabama has still won certainly more than their fair share of Iron Bowls under Nick Saban, but it does seem like the upsets are happening more frequently than with any other team during this period of time. And look, we'll find out. We'll find out how much of that is Auburn. We'll find out how much of that was maybe Gus Malzahn. Maybe that was the real kryptonite. What was the head coach over there, who is obviously no longer there. But the fact remains that there is, I think, reason for concern and pause. And Saban talked about it this week. He actually did say, it can sort of, he sort of implied it can almost ruin the legacy of a team to lose an Iron Bowl. He brought up the fact that if that's the one game you lose, if you go undefeated and that's the one game you lose, it's the only thing anybody remembers about that team. He said there's always a but if you lose the Iron Bowl. And I think that was an interesting comment to hear from him, because it suggests that his Iron Bowl losses have stuck with him and that he does remember them, and they sort of stick in his craw a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Matt, yesterday was Thanksgiving. Alabama fans should give thanks that this Auburn team is not ranked, right? Because Auburn was ranked for most of the season, and Alabama, under Nick Saban, was 3-4 against ranked Auburn teams in the Iron Bowl, 1-4 on the road at Auburn against a ranked Auburn team. So, whether or not you believe in stats like that, they kind of speak for themselves at times. And when Auburn has something to play for, they are very dangerous to Alabama, even when Alabama has everything to play for. So Alabama at least has that in their favor. They are playing against an Auburn team that has lost 3 straight. They have struggled the last several weeks. But you said it, Matt. If you look back at those losses that you mentioned, 3 of those losses that Nick Saban's teams took were against Gus Malzahn. So Auburn fired him. They kicked him out.
You could kind of go back and retroactively give him the 2010 one, or at least partial credit for that.
They do too, or they did anyway before they fired him. So they got rid of him. They got rid of the guy who I think was probably, other than maybe Dabo Swinney, you can make an argument for Hugh Freeze, probably the best in the country at beating Nick Saban, right? And he's gone now. He's at UCF, and now we'll see what happens with Harsin on Saturday in his first shot at him. But yeah, oh well.
Yeah, lots of good comments coming in from folks, giving us your takes on this game and how you're feeling heading into it. I mean, there is a pretty good mix here, Ben, of confidence and nerves. It seems like, which is pretty par for the course, I think, for Bama fans. And we always thank you guys for your contributions to the show. It's a big part of why we do the Bammers show here, presented to you every week by the Mercedes-Benz Tech program. And Ben, there's some other Saban comments that are very specific about this game that I think we need to get into. It came, a lot of people might have missed it because it happened Wednesday night on his radio show, which I don't know how many people are sort of aware of that anymore, how many people listen to it. But sometimes in the past, Saban has used that to vent some emotion that maybe he didn't necessarily want going out to the main press conferences. He didn't want it ending up on SportsCenter, or he wanted to speak maybe more directly to the hardcore base of fans. But he was quite emotional, Ben. He definitely had some stuff he needed to get out at that radio show this week, and it was actually aimed at the fans. We've heard him. It was actually prompted by a question by a fan who called in and was sort of bringing up media rat poison, which we know has been a favorite target of Saban over the years, basically saying that the team sometimes can get it in their heads when they hear the media talking them up, that can have an adverse effect on your motivation. And a fan brought this up. Saban sort of dismissed that and said, I don't think that's the problem right now for Alabama. I think the problem is that fans don't support this team to his liking. He was essentially saying that he feels like some of the fans are entitled and feel like they deserve victory, and because of that, they don't celebrate the good things that this team is accomplishing. They criticize them after they win for not being dominant enough. And I think that this was an interesting moment for Saban for a number of reasons, Ben. For one, I think Saban has spent a lot of time over the years telling people not to get too excited about his team winning. He sort of demands a higher standard of them himself and says it's not good enough for us to win. We need to be dominant, and we have to play to our own standard. But I think also it shows a level of sympathy and concern for his players. It almost, to me, Ben, and I'm reading into it a little bit, but it almost seems to me like he's taking up for his players. Like he feels like his players are being unfairly criticized by their own fan base, and that he's stepping in to sort of take up for them.
Yeah, Matt, for sure. And there was actually a call 2 weeks ago, I think before the Arkansas game, where a fan said fans need to focus on Arkansas. They're looking ahead to Georgia. They're looking ahead, and they're thinking about college football playoff implications and everything. But Alabama has to beat Arkansas to clinch the West. And if they don't do that, they got to beat Auburn, right? So there's still a lot in front of Alabama right now. And Saban kind of said, yeah, good point, whatever. And maybe he said this week what he really meant to say back then, right? Because that was kind of the opportunity with the fans saying, hey, like we got to focus on this. And fans they're thinking too big picture right now. I see it two ways, Matt. Like I see with Saban's rant, and it's the commenters are saying like this was a great rant. It's one of the classics. It'll go down, top 10 rant all time. Maybe his best, right? Some people have said this is his best rant so far. I think it's interesting though when he directs his energy at the fans sometimes, and that's why I see it two different ways. On one hand, he's exactly right. There are fans who needed to hear that. Like I was in the stands for the Arkansas game. I had fans in front of me and behind me who were so negative about every little thing that happened in the game. They were just really hard on the players. Nothing was good enough for them. And not in this Saban way of like it needs to meet the Bama standard or however they want to brand it. Like it was just negative energy. And there was a moment when Arkansas ran a play and they gained like 5 yards, right? And this guy below me said, you see, they gained 5 yards on that. And it's like, okay, so Arkansas had no business running one play that gained 5 yards all game long. It's ridiculous. So there are some lame fans who should maybe better appreciate all that they've had during this era and what they've had right in front of them. This is a 10-win team on the verge of another SEC championship, a potential playoff appearance, and we lose sight of how special this run has been under Nick Saban and even this season. So to get frustrated and disappointed and stressed about a team that is one of the best in the nation right now might seem a little silly. But that leads me to the other side of this, Matt. Nick Saban has created and promoted a very specific winning standard in Tuscaloosa. And it might apply a little differently for fans as opposed to the players and the coaches who are certainly more hands-on in creating that culture. But the fans are a huge part of that culture, right? And the tradition. And the winning tradition is a big reason that Nick Saban has said he wanted to come to Tuscaloosa in the first place. So it's hard to spend a lot of time holding someone accountable when they've won 6 national titles and done so much for the program and the community. Nick Saban makes a lot of money. He makes almost $9 million per season because of that winning culture and standard that he has created and because of all the winning that he has done. The winning is a reason he has his job. He even said that recently. Why have you had so much longevity? Well, the winning helps, right? But the expectation that the fans have play a huge role, Matt, in why that standard is there in the first place. The fans don't get paid millions of dollars to buy tickets and merch or subscribe to cable and streaming services to watch the games. They pay their hard-earned money to do that. And no fan base loves their team more than Alabama fans do. It's really expensive to be an Alabama fan or to support the program. Does Nick Saban know how much season tickets cost or how much of a toll it takes to tailgate every week? Something that he said he has never done, to drive cross-country in some cases, to see games, to book hotel rooms, all these other logistical hurdles that are required to be part of that winning culture. So are fans a little entitled? Absolutely. But they are entitled to be entitled sometimes. And it was something that fans absolutely needed to hear. And I guess it was the right time, Matt, on the eve of Thanksgiving. But fans deserve a lot of credit for what they bring to this culture, to the atmosphere that they create, the decades that so many of them have put into loving this program. So it goes both ways. And all the other thing I'll say, Matt, is it kind of surprises me even more that the rant had nothing to do with the Iron Bowl, right? Like, and for a guy, the guy who put so much emphasis on rat poison, focusing on what's right in front of you, which is what the rant basically addressed. I was surprised that he got so worked up when he has such a big game in a place where he's lost his last 3 out of the 4 visits that they've had. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think some of this is kind of a monster of his own making. You know, he has a lot of the fan attitudes that we see are, right or wrong, I think they are an attempt to emulate what they see Nick Saban saying about his own team. I think they see Saban holding his own team to a very high standard. And I think they feel like subconsciously they hear that and they say, well, that's how I have to treat the team too. I have to hold the team to that standard too. And I think that's at least a part of what has led to the amount of success they've had. But, I think this is kind of what Saban has done a little bit over the years is he makes adjustments. He's coaching every aspect of the program. And, I'll give you a quick sense of perspective from outside of Alabama. I've been talking to, because I'm a sports reporter at AL.com and I cover Alabama and I cover Auburn also. There's been, I think a lot going on at Auburn in recent years, from a coaching change to trying to figure out kind of who exactly is in charge over there. And one of the things that when you talk to people from inside Auburn, one of the things that frustrates them and why they feel like they haven't been able to reach this level that Alabama and Georgia are on is because they don't have somebody that can unite every aspect of the program, from players and coaches, administrators, boosters, fans. It's really tough to get all those groups of people on the same page. And Nick Saban being able to do that at Alabama is probably the single biggest reason why Alabama has gone on the most successful run of any program in college football history. I think what he's trying to do here is, once again, he himself has changed his approach. And like any smart person over time, I think he's evolving as a coach and as a leader. But now that means you got to get everybody else on this new page with you that you're on. So you have to adjust the way players operate, your coaching staff, the administration, and you have to adjust the fan base's mindset. And that's probably going to be the hardest part because it's sort of like wrangling cats. It's the fans fall behind him. They trust him. They like Nick Saban, but it can be very tough to get a stadium full of people to all get on the same page with you.
Yeah, you can't control fans. You can't. Fans control themselves. They react to what they see on the field, and they want to be a part of the winning culture, but they want it to be a winning culture. And it has been at Alabama in an overwhelming way, right? But if that changed next season and Alabama went 2-10, fans would feel differently about it. And in this age of college football, in terms of like how long coaches last, and I'm not implying in any way anything would happen to Nick Saban next season or any other season. I mean, the guy he's the greatest of all time. He probably will be for the foreseeable future. But like he said, to use his words, the reason he has had the longevity that he has is because of the winning. And so long as he keeps winning, fans will be happy for the most part. And if they are a little critical at times, he can take it. He even said a few weeks ago, I think, when somebody asked him at a press conference about, fans being critical of Bill O'Brien's play calling or something, I think Saban said, "We're open to criticism," with a smile on his face. And who knows what he really meant when he said it. But if you're open to criticism, take it. It'll bounce right off of you.
For sure. I don't think he's worried that much about the fan base, but I think generally when you hear him talking to fans or to the media, it's more of an attempt to speak to his players indirectly. He is trying to affect them psychologically and get them where he wants them to be. And if you hear him saying this stuff about the fans, it's probably, at least in part, because Nick Saban feels like this team's confidence may not be exactly where he wants it to be. As well as they've performed, I think they're probably as aware as anybody that they're not living up to the same standard that the 2020 Alabama team set. It would be almost impossible for them to. But I think based on kind of his other comments about this team and the way they've practiced and the way they've approached things this season, I think he likes the team. I think he thinks this is a team with a high potential, but I think he also is concerned that their confidence can dip very quickly if things are not going well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like if he felt like maybe the players expressed their frustration with the fan base behind closed doors, right? Like maybe they were frustrated with being criticized, and maybe Saban took this as an opportunity to say, "Look, I've got your back. I will address the fans and let them know that the players work hard. All the players need is your support." Like I remember
Scuba Steve.
I do. All 4 years of my undergrad, Scuba Steve, I do. But if he felt like that's what the players needed to hear, you're right. He uses those things as a vessel to like spread that message and everything all the time. But he went pretty hard on the fan base this time. And I think for the most part, it's like you heard people in the room clapping. You saw people on Twitter saying, "Yeah, coach, get him, get him." It's like he's probably talking about a lot of you, right? Like, and look, it fired people up.
But that means it worked then. Look, even if it was aimed at them, and you hear them react that way, it's he got his message across. He reinforced it.
Do you think they were in there clapping, saying, "Yeah, you tell him," or do you think that they were saying, "You're right, I could improve, coach. I
No,
could improve"?
nobody thinks it's about
No.
them, but I think it still gets through. I think the
It got
message
through,
still
man. That
gets
went
through.
viral. That went viral. So, I mean, the message was loud and clear, spread far and wide. So, I'm sure he accomplished what he needed to. But, I think that there are aspects of the fan experience that Nick Saban may never understand. I really do.
For sure.
Because, and so, he not to say that he fancies himself anything, but Nick Saban speaks to the psychology of the game all the time. Whether it's the players, the coaches, the fans, in some cases, he understands he understands psychology. I think generally, in just terms of what motivates people, what drives them, how failure affects them, etc. And so I think that he's still got some to learn about how fans operate and how they react to what they see on the field, and how, the ebbs and flows of a season, and how they feel about coaches, etc. So it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least. But in the end, the guy's won 6 national championships, Matt. He could win his 7th this year. It could be next year. Who knows? So Nick Saban is pretty untouchable right now, but the fan base plays a big role in what happens in Tuscaloosa.
For sure. And we'll see how that all goes. We'll see how everybody reacts on Saturday. Before we wrap up today, Ben, I did want to touch on a story that happened this week. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar as Bama fans, but this week we lost a very important, iconic figure in the University of Alabama athletics community, Cecil Hurt, who was the longtime beat writer and columnist from the Tuscaloosa News, who covered Alabama since Bear Bryant's final year at Alabama. That was when Cecil started on this beat, has been here all along, literally has been doing this job for my entire life, since the year I was born, Ben. And, I think he meant something to every person who's been a part of this community and this fan base in different ways. I can speak to my experiences with him, which is that, I obviously was aware of him just growing up, living in Birmingham, and having Alabama football be such a big part of my life. But when I was at UA, when I worked for the Crimson White, the student newspaper, I got sort of very quickly thrust into a role as a sports reporter. Was not expecting to ever do that. And it happened very suddenly, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I will say that from day one, from the first time I ever went out to the Alabama football facilities to try and figure out how it is that you cover a team, Cecil was there. He was, at first, I would say, somebody that you watch and you try and learn from, and you say, what's that guy looking at? That's wherever he's looking, that's where I need to be looking. But over time, the more I was there, the more Cecil would start to engage with me and listen to what I was saying. And if he had a different take on it, he would say what he thought, and he would do it in a way that wasn't dismissive of what anybody else thought. And I think that's an extremely rare thing in sports media in general. So much of what we do is about arguing, it seems like, or saying, you don't get it. Here's the right take on it from me. Cecil wasn't really like that. Cecil may have disagreed with people, but he really felt more like this was a dialogue and everybody could have different takes on it. And I think because he approached it that way, people listened and paid attention when he talked, because it never felt like Cecil was trying to win a contest. It never felt like he was trying to come off as the bigger person than whoever else he was engaged with. Cecil was, despite being a almost unanimously respected figure, he didn't assume that anybody thought his opinion was more important than anybody else's. He just wanted to be the best at what he did and share what he thought with everybody else. And I think what a lot of people don't know is behind the scenes, he was helping a lot of other people be better at that too, both by example and by literally showing folks and teaching people younger in the industry about how to operate and how to do that job. Just can't imagine somebody conducting themselves with more integrity than Cecil did in the 15 plus years that I have worked, in and around the UA athletics community.
Yeah, very well put, Matt. I know that I feel the same way that you do. A lot of people do. People have expressed that all week. This doesn't seem real still that we've lost Cecil Hurt. Thoughts, obviously, with his loved ones, his friends, his family, in the Tuscaloosa community, to be honest. And I'll go even greater to our profession, really. Cecil Hurt meant a lot to what we do. And just to speak to like his legacy, like he was the authority on Alabama sports, like the authority. He was influential on the way people understood and felt about every single aspect of the Crimson Tide, right? Like people, including myself, had trouble articulating our feelings about a game or a moment until we read Cecil's column. Then it was sort of all made clear, right, for us. And Matt, you obviously just attested to this, but any fan or journalist who read his work, encountered him, they learned from Cecil Hurt. One of his great gifts was understanding the real story before, during, or after each game, what it actually meant, how it affected the big picture, the larger narrative of the season, and what he said really mattered to people. Like if I was reading the game day preview in the Tuscaloosa News, I would skim through all the other predictions and everything to see what Cecil had to say about the game that day, what he thought would happen, right? That carried all the weight for me. And if I missed it live, I would go out of my way to listen to him on the Paul Feinbaum show. I would go out of my way to download it because his segments were always the best. His segments on the Nick Saban weekly radio show when he was the media guest that week, those were always the best. And we knew it before he passed away, but we're certainly learning more from Nick Saban himself, just how much he respected and trusted Cecil Hurt. And look, I didn't know Cecil personally. Like I maybe had like one or two conversations with him, and I shared one of those, my longest conversation with him on the Bammers podcast. And I don't say that to promote the podcast itself. I say it to promote Cecil's.
Everybody should go listen to it for sure. It's great.
Yeah, to promote Cecil's voice, right, and Cecil's perspective, because it's so unique and you'll learn something from what he has to say. But I spent much of my life reading and admiring his work. And yes, people have said like Cecil Hurt was so brilliant on Twitter, right? Because he was. Like that app fit him like a glove, like because he was so full of wit and wisdom that he could have fun with 140 characters or whatever it is now. But I think the main thing that I personally learned from Cecil was not to overreact to things when you see them, right? Like you can see something, you can gather those thoughts, you can take your time, and you can share a considerate and measured response that is filled with substance and perspective instead of just blurting the first thing that comes to your head, right? We live in that world. Everybody does it. Like that's what Twitter is, and we react to things in real time. And he did too. And he did it in a really good way, in a fun way. But what I always look forward to was that column after he had taken some time to express those thoughts in a collected way, in a way that we obviously learned a lot from. And so, I mean, I guess there will just never be another person like Cecil Hurt, another presence like him on a beat like this. And the industry lost a titan, and a lot of people lost a good friend too. So our thoughts are with those people. Cecil Hurt was the greatest at what he did.
I'll throw one more thing that stands out to me about Cecil, and this is less from working alongside him, just something he wrote that I remember that has always stuck with me, which is all the way back in 2006. It was right after the Iron Bowl in 2006, so would have been right around this time of year. Mike Shula had his best season in 2005. Everybody felt like the program was finally on the right track. They come out in 2006, and they struggled again, and they lose the Iron Bowl. And there were plenty of people on both sides of the issue, hard as it is to believe that people are on the other side of it, but there were lots of people who said, we can't overreact. We need to hang on to Mike Shula. He's got things going in the right direction. This was a blip. And there were people who wanted to fire him. And I remember very, very specifically that Cecil's take on this, his column about it was, the question we need to be asking is not, has Mike Shula done enough to deserve the job, to keep the job? Is it time to fire him because he lost X, Y, or Z? Cecil said, and this is such a great example of what you said, Ben, of him boiling the situation down to its basics. He said, can Alabama do better right now? Is it possible for Alabama to put themselves in a better situation than they're in right now? And we all know what the answer to that question ended up being. And I think it was a brilliant way to frame the moment and the situation. It wasn't, I think still to this day, people would say, it wasn't about needing to get rid of the guy. It wasn't about Mike Shula deserves to be fired. It was about Alabama and could they do better? And I think that's in general something, that's a question, that's a framing that I've thought about myself for Alabama football since then, for other programs at Alabama, for other schools. When I'm writing about these schools and what these tough situations they find themselves in, to me, it's such a great way to frame a question before you make any huge decision is, can I do better than where I'm at right now? Could I be putting myself in a better position than where I am? Not all the other stuff about deserving or kind of getting even with people or all the ego related stuff. It's just about creating the best possible situation and what you need to do to get there. And that framing of that moment has always stuck with me from Cecil. And I think it's a great example of the perspective that he showed when he approached stuff like this.
Yeah, extremely well put, Matt. Cecil will be missed. And again, it doesn't feel real. It was a shock. But it's been amazing to see the tributes that have poured in for him almost immediately, whether it was Aaron Suttles and Tommy D's on the Paul Feinbaum show, Paul Feinbaum himself, the day that Cecil passed. But if you just go to Twitter and search Cecil Hurt, Google, whatever, you'll see some amazing, an amazing collection of thoughts about him that, reflect a lot of what Matt was just saying, but people offering their own unique experiences with him and encounters and just what they learned from him. So just can't believe it, but it's so sad, but Cecil just meant so much to everybody.
Well, we will certainly be thinking of Cecil when we are out there this Saturday. I will be in Auburn for the game, which is at 2:30 on CBS for everybody asking that question in the comments. It will be impossible to not think about Cecil out there at that game and what his feelings would be about what we're watching. But we move on, we trudge on forward and see what Alabama football has to bring us next. And the rest of us will be thinking of Cecil as we go through the rest of this football season and on through the rest of the seasons going forward. Hopefully we can take some lessons from Cecil forward with us. Everybody who commented today, both talking about Cecil just now and about everything else we've been talking about on the show today. Thank you guys so much for participating in the show, for doing it all season. We will have another episode next week because Alabama has clinched the SEC West and we'll be playing in the SEC Championship. So we will do another episode of Bammers with you guys next week, and we'll see how it goes beyond that. I'm sure Ben and I will at least do something before the bowl game, but we'll have to figure out our holiday schedule, Ben. I know things are starting to get a little crazy this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm still recovering from Thanksgiving, so
Oh
like
man,
I may fall asleep during the game tomorrow. Kind of glad I'm not going to be there.
I'm
To be
about to have
honest.
to get out my Christmas tree. So everybody in the comments, pray for me. This is the one part of the process that I don't particularly look forward to, but hopefully I get through this day and can arrive in Auburn intact tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. And at this point, Matt, like I'm kind of leaning towards going the fake tree route for that reason. Like going and getting a new tree every week, like just makes me think like maybe it would be better if I just had one in the attic, and that would save me a trip. So,
Yeah.
viewers out there, real tree or fake tree, let us know in the comments.
All right. Well, hope everybody had a good holiday. We will hope for the best for this weekend, and however it goes, we'll be back to talk with you guys about it next week on Bammers. And for my friend Ben Flanagan here, I'm Matt Scalisi, and we will see you guys next time.
This show is presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. To learn more about Mercedes-Benz's world of advanced automotive technology, text the word Mercedes to 55678 or visit www.learnmercedes.com.